Hi guys, welcome back to Nerd Crave. And today, I've seen a lot of YouTubers recontextualizing and re-uploading some of their old content. For example, one of my favorite things is what Scott the Woz is doing with his Scott Stash channel. Re-uploading some stuff and giving some background behind the scenes stuff and that sort of thing. So I wanted to do this with this video today, and I'm going to do a series of videos called The Vault, where I look back at some of my earliest videos and really talk about, maybe what's happened, in the gaming industry since then, or where I've come as a YouTuber, how far I've come since then, or whatever. Not to jerk my own chain, so to speak, but just to kind of have this conversation with you. I mean, we have over 2,000 subscribers here, and when a lot of these videos were made, I had like 50 to 100 subscribers. So, let's take a look back at some of the early days of Nerd Crave. This video in particular that we're looking at is the first collaboration video that I did with other YouTubers, and it's an interesting video. It's essentially a book review of Console Wars by Blake J. Harris, along with some input from other gaming, people on YouTube as to how they fell on the Sega versus Nintendo debate back in the playgrounds in the 80s and 90s. So let's just take a look at the video.
Welcome to my review of the book Console Wars. This is an important review of a very important book. If you're anything like me, you were around in the 90s for the ultimate debate, and that is Sega Genesis versus Super Nintendo. And this book not only tells the story of the actual console wars, but brings to life the people, places, and things behind the curtain. I actually read this book as an audiobook, and the presentation was fantastic. It was gripping all the way through. The book is definitely large, and it takes, a good amount of time to read, but it is definitely worth it. It is a fantastic book. It reads like a novel. Actually, I have a quote.
So I'm pretty impressed looking back. I was speaking pretty well. I had this video. I find whenever I'm passionate about a subject, I speak a lot better, a lot more clearly, really have a better rhythm when I'm passionate about something. And I was very passionate about this book. I had just finished reading it, listening to the audiobook. Uh, but I do look a little uncomfortable behind the camera there. I sort of look like a bit of a deer in the headlights.
From the author, I spoke to him on the phone today, Blake J. Harris, and he said he wanted to write a book that his grandmother could read, a book about video games that even his grandmother could be interested in.
I'm actually, to this day, one of the coolest things ever was being able to have a phone conversation with the author of this book. As a YouTuber starting out, my goals were simply to have access to that, stratosphere of YouTube creators and game developers and all that kind of stuff, to be able to actually have conversations with these sorts of people. And, this video being, in my first few months on the platform, I was absolutely just tickled pink when I reached out to Blake J. Harris on Twitter, and he agreed to a phone interview, regarding this book, and it's going to, live on as one of the coolest things that I've done on the platform, and it was well ahead, like maybe 100 subscribers.
And I think he's done a superb job, because my number one comment on this book was it doesn't read like a nonfiction book at all. It reads like a novel. There's a definite protagonist. The book has a definite, I won't say bias, but a definite leaning towards the story of Sega, with Thomas Kalinske and the Sega Genesis and Sega of America being the main protagonist, and Nintendo kind of being the obstacle to overcome on the way to Sega's success in the 90s. But before I really get into the review, and I'm going to get into a more in-depth review at the end of this video, so stick around for that. If you haven't subscribed already, click that subscribe button, click the notification button so that you'll be notified every time I put up a new video.
That's something I don't really do anymore. Back then, it was kind of the established whatever to, in the first minute or so, to reach out for engagement, subscribe, whatever. I've kind of got to the place now where I figure people are going to subscribe if they want. I might say thank you for subscribing at the end of the video. But yeah, it's funny to see how things evolve on the platform.
Back, relax, grab a coffee because I've done something pretty interesting today. Because there's such a debate, and there always has been such a debate since the 90s about Sega versus Nintendo, I wanted to bring in a few of my friends and fellow YouTubers to weigh in, and I asked them this question. In the 90s, were you Team Sega or Team Nintendo, and how did that affect your gaming choices going forward? So we're going to go right now to Smash JT and see how he stands on the issue. Smash?
What's going on, Nerd Crave? Thank you so much for having me.
To add a little context here, at this point in time, I had just made sort of friends with Smash JT. My second video on the channel actually was criticizing Smash JT for criticizing John Hancock. And it's kind of funny how you create relationships on this platform actually by criticizing someone. We ended up creating a dialogue, and then I ended up watching more and more of his videos and realizing that Smash was actually a much cooler person than my initial impressions of that first video that I watched.
It is Smash JT in my newly coming along game room, and you asked me a question regarding the 16-bit era and if it was Super Nintendo or Genesis that kind of shaped my gaming future. And while I did have both and I played both a lot, I would say by a long shot it was the Super Nintendo. And a lot of my games I still have them with me. They're in this case that I mailed away for with Nintendo Power. And the specific games that really shaped my whole life was definitely Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, Final Fantasy 3, which I found out later was Final Fantasy 6, Earthbound, role-playing games in general, Super Metroid as well. There's just Zelda. So many great memories from the 16-bit era. I still go back and play these today, and they still feel just as good as they were back then. Right now I'm playing Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, which is also a fantastic game, but these games I go back to all the time. Anyways, thank you so much for having me on, and you stay smashing.
Alright, next I'd like to welcome my friend Papa Pete, the old guy gamer. I've been watching every one of his videos over the last year or so since I discovered him. I've watched every single one of his videos, and he's somebody you should honestly follow. Let's see where he weighs in on this issue.
It's interesting, as I mentioned, the relationships that you form on this platform are really kind of cool. And Papa Pete had a similar arc, still does have a similar arc to me, where we're both Canadian boys and we're both older gentlemen, if you will. And he had a particular flair and love for the Intellivision and the Atari, and also he was going for a complete Xbox collection at the time, and I really found him easy to relate to. I really enjoyed my conversations with him. I'm sad that we really haven't done a collab in quite some time. So, Pete, if you're watching this video, man, I would absolutely love to do another collab with
Hey guys, Papa Pete here, and I was asked by Aaron to come on and throw my hat into the ring and let you know about my pick as to whether or not back in the 90s I was Team Nintendo or Team Sega. And I have to say that it's kind of neat to get this question because I really did have to make a conscientious decision back at that time because it was around 92, 93, and I was looking to buy a new console, and I couldn't make up my mind whether I wanted to get a Super Nintendo or a Sega Genesis. And at the end of the day, one thing really swayed me in one direction or the other, and that is sports games. Back in those days, and really today too, some of my absolute favorite games of all time were sports games. I used to love playing hockey games, baseball games, basketball games, football games. One of my favorite games of all time is Tecmo Super Bowl. And what I was looking for is I had lots of games, sports games on the NES, and I wanted to go to that next level. So all the articles that I had read they all said that the Sega Genesis did a better job with the sound and the actual playability with sports games. So for me, after reading a few of these articles, which were really pretty predominant at the time, I had no other decision but to go with Team Sega. So I picked up the Sega Genesis. How did it affect me later on? Well, I don't know if I continued there so much. Frankly, I went on to PlayStation was my next system. I didn't get the Saturn or the 32X. I didn't get any of those. I kind of wish I had them because I'd still have them today. I did get the Sega Dreamcast though, which I like very much. I did not have the GameCube back in the day. So I always sort of stayed with Team Sega, but I still always loved Nintendo at the same time. The bottom line was this: back in 1993, finances sort of dictated exactly what you're going to get. If I could have had it all then, yeah, I would have loved to have had them both, had everything I could get. But I had to pick and choose. And with the absolute best sports games available for home consoles at the time, the choice was clearly Team Sega. Take care, guys.
And now,
You know, one thing I really noticed that is starting to fall out of fashion for the most part is this spread you see of all these games and stuff in the background. For me here, new on YouTube, I was living in Edmonton at the time. Most of my collection was back home in Ontario, and I actually built this set with this, this table you see in front of me, the bookshelves behind I went out and bought, and a lot of the stuff you see on the shelves I picked up at thrift stores and things like that, just specifically to have a set, if you will, to have like a backdrop for the videos. And, a lot of the games here that you see on the background, my very first video on the platform was talking about how all of my games were in binders, that I had over 500 disc-based games in binders, and that's because I brought my whole collection across the country for a job, and the only way I could fit it all in the car was to put all my games in binders. So the games that you see on the shelf here, the Wii games down at the bottom, and the 360 and PS3 games and stuff, this is the tiny collection that I had amassed in the period of 6 months to a year of being out in Edmonton. And then there's other stuff, some VHS, and there's some Betamax tapes on the. I still have a lot of this stuff, and I wouldn't say that I was being disingenuous, that I was pretending to be a nerd or something, but this was just stuff that I had purchased that I cared about, and a lot of it was, you see these Zelda cups up behind my head here. That was something that was released alongside Link's Awakening in 7-Elevens. And they're 7-Eleven cups that were super cool and exclusive to Canada. I actually sent a few to friends in the States that wanted some. But anyway, let's get back to the.
for another Pete. OEB Pete or Open Every Box Pete, what have you got to say about Sega versus Nintendo?
Hey everybody, this is OEB Pete here from Open Every Box, and Nerd Crave reached out to me and asked me a question I have not thought about in forever. I don't think I've ever thought about it. I'm not much into the console wars anytime, but the question was asked what I thought about, in the 16-bit generation of gaming, the, Nintendo and Sega. What was I, a Nintendo fanboy, I guess? Or was I on Team Nintendo, or was I on Team Sega? Well, I guess I was on no team. I was big into, at the time, that was in the 90s, so early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, so I was finishing high school and entering college. So perfect fanboy craziness, right? That's when you kind of, your opinions are maxed out on everything. But I didn't have a Sega Genesis. I had a Super Nintendo, and I wasn't a fanboy because I used to read GamePro magazine, Electronic Gaming Monthly magazine, those things, and I'd look at.
It's sad to say, my friend here, OEB Pete, is really no longer on the platform. I'm not quite sure I remember what happened. I think there was some drama. And, it's sad to kind of see the arc of, some YouTubers, and I'm glad I've managed to avoid that. But I mean, maybe my turn's coming with the drama. You never know on this platform. But, Pete, if you're watching this, I miss you, buddy.
All the games. And it's not that I didn't like the Genesis, I just didn't have one. My ecosystem was the Super Nintendo because I had owned an NES. But I played the Genesis a lot at friends and family's house, so I have a great appreciation for them. So, but the fact that I was in the Nintendo ecosystem, because that's what I got for gifts and presents and stuff, I guess I have this special nostalgia for Nintendo and Nintendo products. And some of my favorite memories ever of gaming is the NES and the Super Nintendo. playing games like NHL '93, RBI Baseball on the NES, Temco Tecmo Super Football, all those games. I absolutely love. So they shaped me as a gamer and as an adult because I just love the family friendly nature of those games. I love the positive nature of most Nintendo games. Sega took risks, and I really appreciate them for that. And I've become a much bigger fan of Sega as I've gotten older and more mature as a gamer through my late teens, 20s, 30s, and now 40s. But I still love Nintendo. So I guess you could say I'm Team Nintendo, but I'm not like exclusive to Nintendo. I love Sony, I love Sega, I love them all. And what I do appreciate from Nintendo is my children are playing it today, and they're going back and playing the old retro games that I play and are enjoying it. And we're still making wonderful memories. So there you have it. I guess I am a Nintendo guy, but I absolutely love Sega and Sony equally. So the 16-bit, I think, the 8-bit to 16-bit generations is the greatest generation in gaming, in my opinion. Just because of the games, the creativity, the graphics, and the fact of where I was at in my life. Well, there you go. And thank you so much, Nerd Crave, for having me on. I love your channel, and you have an awesome day, okay?
The takeaway that I'm getting here, you know, when we were kids, it was pretty cut and dried. It was, Super Nintendo's awesome and Sega Genesis sucks or whatever on the playground, right? I was a little bit younger than these guys. I was in my, early teens, preteens, and early teens when these consoles came out. And I was, in fact, which I'm sure I will probably mention later in the video, I was a TurboGrafx kid because I found a TurboGrafx on clearance in 1990 for like $100 of my own money, and I spent another like 50 or $100 on 5 or 6 games at Radio Shack. There's a blast from the past. My cousin who lived in my upstairs apartment had a Genesis, but nobody in the house had a Super Nintendo, so whatever. But the real takeaway here is that now people seem to be a lot more balanced about liking both of them or seeing the pros and cons of all of them, whereas back in the day the console wars were really based.
Thanks, Pete. Keep opening those boxes. All right, our next guest is PK in the universe. Paul, take it away.
During the 16-bit era,
I made a big boo-boo here. I thought his name was Paul or no, Pete. I I remember, PK, if you're watching this, I'm still confused as to what your actual name is because I thought your name was Pete because everybody else's name was Pete and I was stumbling. Maybe your name's Paul, maybe your name's Pete. I don't know. It was kind of embarrassing, but revealing a bit about myself, you corrected me on Twitter a couple of years ago and said, "Why do you keep calling me Pete? My name's not Pete." Well, I still don't know what your name is, man. Reply down in the comments.
I was very much pro Nintendo, honestly, and I still love Nintendo as a company and I love the systems they make. There's never been a time where I didn't buy a Nintendo home console when it was current. So, in fact, my very first video game console I ever bought with my own money was the Super NES. Ironically enough, though, the very first 16-bit console I ever played was the Sega Genesis. I actually played it at a babysitter's house, and they had Sonic 2, and that was my first experience in the 16-bit era. And yeah, but it was something about Nintendo, honestly. Just in fact, Super Mario RPG is my favorite game of all time.
If you follow me and you don't follow PK, all jokes aside, there are a lot of similarities between our channel arcs, and I really enjoy watching PK. He does a lot of really interesting reviews of some Evercade stuff and some older NES games and things like that. And he's just so real, man. He just sits there in his basement and talks about the things that he loves. And sometimes with all the glitz and glam and clickbait and stuff on YouTube, it's really nice to just sit in a buddy's basement and chill.
Time and it's of course on the Super NES, so naturally I gravitate even more so to the Super NES. In the modern era, of course, of playing video games, especially I love playing games on the Switch. I find myself playing my Sega Genesis collection on the Switch more than I do the Super NES online, actually. So it's interesting how, like, I missed out so much on the Sega Genesis. I still find myself wanting to explore that library more so than the Super Nintendo, just because of how much I played it, and so that's how that's affected my gaming habits at this point in my life. So that's what I think about that.
As you can see, almost 30 years later, there's no shortage of differing opinions on who won the console wars. Let's take it to our last guest, Retro Tony, and see where he stands.
How's it going? Tony here. Aaron asked me a very important question. During the 16-bit era, was I Team Sega Genesis or was I Team Super Nintendo? Well, in all reality, I did have a Super Nintendo as a kid and a Sega Genesis. So I was a little bit of both. Now, the Sega Genesis.
Tony is another guy that I've sort of lost contact with. I mean, we're both floating around out there, but as much as you make connections on this platform, you also lose them. You get wrapped up in your own hype, you get wrapped up in your own rhythms of producing videos and stuff, and 6 months or a year goes by and you don't do another collab or something. And before you know it, you've kind of lost touch with people, and that's a little bit of a theme here in this Vault episode. Is that I really need to reach out to some of you guys. For any of you guys that are watching this video that were in this collab, I'm sorry that we've kind of lost touch, and I really want to reach out and rebuild our friendships and do some more collabs because this video was awesome.
Though, this was my console. This was my very first console. I didn't have to share this with my brother. I didn't have to share it with anyone else. It was my console, playing Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Shining Force 1, Shining Force 2, Phantasy Star 4, etc. But I still adored and loved the Super Nintendo. There were so many great games on this. Chrono Trigger, Earthbound, Final Fantasy 2/4, Final Fantasy 3/6, Super Mario World, Super Metroid, Super Punch-Out, just to name a few. So I loved both. So how did this affect me going forward as a gamer? Now, I still love the Super Nintendo. I actually would borrow games from friends. I would rent games. And I'd still get games for birthdays, Christmases, etc. But I spent the majority of my money on Sega Genesis games. I have fond memories of saving up my allowance money, birthday money, paper route money to buy great games like Sonic & Knuckles and Turtles Hyperstone Heist. Man, I spent a lot of money on Sega Genesis games back in the day, but you got to consider I was between the ages of 10 to 12 years old. So I have an affinity for both. I love both, and I still collect for both systems to this day.
Funny thing with me is, along my arc, I've actually stopped collecting retro games. Excuse me, I've actually made several videos about how I sold my collection and put the money into the YouTube channel and new computers and things like that. I've got several videos. If you've been following me over the last couple of years, you'd be quite aware. Since the pandemic boom, when game prices went absolutely berserk, I decided to sell a lot of my stuff, and I wouldn't consider myself a retro collector at all. I do still actively collect for the Switch and the Xbox One, and that's it. I don't have anything else. No 3DS, no DS, no any cartridge based. I never really collected the cartridge based stuff. Um, but I sold my GameCube collection, my PS1 and PS2 collections. It's all gone, and now I'm on this kick. And little sneak peek for 2024. We're going to be talking an awful lot about emulation and Batocera because man, do I have an awesome arcade machine that I've built that plays all of that old stuff, and I don't need these physical games anymore. But moving on.
Alright, thanks guys. So that really shows you the variety of opinions from the 16-bit era. Was it Sega Genesis? Was it Super Nintendo? Or were you like me, the odd guy on the corner that had a TurboGrafx 16? And
I
I
told you.
fought just as hard as everybody else to say that my system was the best one. And I still think to this day the TurboGrafx 16 was fantastic, but nobody talks about it. And frankly, there was barely even a reference to the TurboGrafx in here. He did mention it. This book is the
Sad.
most insanely detailed account of the 16-bit console wars
Fantastic
that I've
book.
ever seen. The gaming historian, a YouTuber that I really respect, I think his content is really credible and well researched, he did a review on this book, and he said that there are a lot of things in this book that even he did not know about, and he was pretty impressed.
When I interviewed the author Blake J. Harris, he says he conducted over 200 interviews in addition to gathering thousands of documents and video clips. He further claims that over the 3-year process of writing this book, he was, for much of it, in nearly daily contact with several of the key players in the story. The book covers a 6-year period from the hiring of Thomas Kalinske as Sega of America's president in 1990 and follows his career there as he positions the Sega Genesis to dominate the video game landscape. When he was hired, Sega had less than 10% of the video game market share, and by the time he left in 1996, Sega had captured about 55% of the video game market. The book also goes into great detail about the personalities behind the curtain that eventually killed Sega's hopes for lasting success. Sega of Japan seemed to get jealous of Tom's success in America and began making some very strange decisions that ultimately led to failures like the 32X and the Saturn. My biggest takeaway from this book was the depth of character development. From the first few pages, the reader begins to get invested in the key players, and you begin to root for the underdog. This is really an underdog makes good sort of story, and the author, Mr. Harris, does a great job of creating characters that you care about. You want them to succeed. I was actually so blown away by the character development that I began to doubt its author.
I think this is my first scripted segment in any video, and I don't know if you can tell, but I can definitely tell that I'm reading something here. I think I've gotten a lot better at scripted segments over the years, but it's always harder to sound natural when you're reading something versus looking directly into the camera like I am right now, obviously.
Authenticity. There are so many scenes and details in the book that made me wonder, how could anyone get such information from something that happened almost 30 years ago? I actually reached out to the author, and I was honored to speak with him on the phone in New York City for almost an hour. In the course of that interview, I asked him about this. He said that over the course of 3 years of being in almost constant contact with many of the major players in the story, he was able to build a pretty good profile of the characters involved, but that of course he had taken some liberties with things like dialogue to flesh out the characters and move the story along. However, he believes that the context and intent of those liberties are very much in keeping with what the actual setting would have been. This book has been so well received that it has been made into a documentary, and a major motion picture is also in the works. So if you're not a big reader, you will be able to connect in those ways coming soon, but I would definitely recommend the audiobook if you don't like reading. The narrator does a great job of bringing the characters to life and keeping the pace of the book interesting and exciting. Whichever version you choose, this story deserves your attention. The 16-bit generation has so many firsts, from the first global launch of a game to the first game rating board. This is a very important part of gaming history.
Man, my footage is terrible here. I should have put a little more effort into finding cleaner clips and stuff to use. I mean, this is what's floating around on YouTube, but I've found much better luck at finding cleaner, higher resolution clips for these retro type videos, but this is embarrassingly bad.
And without a doubt, this is the best way to learn about it.
Alright guys, so let me know in the comments, were you Team Sega Genesis? Were you Team Super Nintendo? Or were you maybe the weird guy like me that was Team TurboGrafx 16? Let me know down in the comments. And I want to thank the guys that contributed to this video. It really means a lot to me that people were interested in this concept and wanted to contribute. So thank you to Smash JT, thank you to OEB Pete, thank you to Papa Pete, thank you to PK in the Universe, thank you to Retro Tony. Guys, it was great to have you on the channel. And thank you to Blake J. Harris for taking the time to have a long conversation with me and really fill me in on his backstory in terms of how he wrote this book. So, guys, if you haven't subscribed already, go.
Blah, 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 blah. I don't know if there's anything else real important in the last couple of minutes here, but I do want to thank you, if you're watching this video right now, for making it this far into the video, to the end of the video. And, my thoughts on this are mostly I did this project, I'm doing this vault project for my own gratification because I want to look back at those old videos and learn from my mistakes and, help me to grow as a content creator. So if you have any comments or suggestions, uh, you know, feel free to put them down in the comments below. I'd love to start a conversation. You know, YouTube is a funny platform. You can put your absolute heart and soul into it and get nowhere, or you can blow up overnight. But most content creators are something like me, where you pick up a few subscribers here and there, and it's a slow and steady growth. But it takes time to refine your style, and now I'm just here in my bedroom. I don't have a fancy set. I mean, I do have places that I can film when I want to make something a little bit better looking, but it just doesn't matter anymore. Let's just look at the last few minutes of this video. If you want to click off and go away, have a great day, folks. Love you.
Go ahead and subscribe because we're putting up content like this all the time. Hit that little notification bell so that you'll be notified every time I put up a new video. And go ahead and like this video if you liked it, because it lets me know whether this is the type of videos that you want to see in the future. Thanks so much, guys. Stay classy.
Oh my god, I forgot about this. This was my old outro. Let me pull the volume down a little bit. This was my theme song for the longest time, and I made this, kind of B-roll or whatever, video. I had so much fun with this. This used to be my outro on every video. Playing Bonk on the Wii U. Ah, yes, my Disney collection. Alright, guys, thanks for watching. Catch you next time.